Okay, so now we've got the basic concepts across. Let's just have a look at two applications of the time value of money. And for this, I'm going to use Excel again. Okay, so I'm going to ask a very simple question. And I'm not going to go through mathematics here. I'm not going to use formulas. You can use those and have a look through the slides as to how they work. But if we use a tool like Excel, or you use your scientific calculator, these things have got the formulas built in. So it's actually pretty straightforward to work these things out. So the first scenario is going to be this. Let's say 5 years from now, I want to have $100. Okay. And I want to make 5 even payments. And the first payment is going to be straight away. So it's going to be today. So I'm going to make a payment now, another one in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. 4 years. Okay, so that's the beginning of the 5th year. How many payments do I have to make in order to have $100 at the end? Now remember, when I put the money in to an investment or a bank account, I'm going to be earning some interest. So we need to account for that. Let's assume the interest is 5%. And 5% is just a fancy way of writing 0.05. Whoops, sorry. When it sees brackets, it thinks I'm an accountant. And accountants use brackets to say minus. Okay, so in Excel, this is actually pretty simple. We want the payment function. PMT stands for payment. As soon as you open the brackets, hey, look, it tells you. Here's the information you've got to provide. First, provide the interest rate, 5% or 0.05. How many periods are there? There are 5 periods. What's the present value? Okay, I can have a balance already and a balance at the end and some payments in between. Now, I'm starting with 0. I'm asking the question, how much do I need to save? So since I'm starting with 0, the present value is 0. The future value is how much I want at the end of those 5 years. Well, I know I want $100. The last thing I have to put in is the timing. Now, the timing is important. Do I make the payments at the end of the period or do I make them at the beginning of the period? And this can actually be quite substantially different. If I make a payment at the end of the period, then I won't earn any interest on it this year, okay? Because it only came in on the last day of the year. But if I make the payment at the beginning of the year, I earn some interest at the beginning of this year. And not only that, that interest, once earned, has interest earned on it in the 2nd year and the 3rd year. So there's a little bit of a snowball effect there. So changing when the payment happens can actually have a quite substantial difference. That's why sometimes when a bank gives you a choice of making a payment monthly or 2 weekly, go for 2 weekly. The snowball effect is quite substantial. Okay, so the first payment, as I said, I'm going to start making the payments straight away. So the payment is going to be now, and Excel annotates that by using a 1. Okay, did I do that right? Yes, 1. Okay, so the payments I need to make are $17.24. Okay, let's work out whether that actually gives us the answer that we want. So for 5 years, for each year, I'm going to have an opening balance. Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to have an opening balance. I'm going to earn some interest on it. And I'm going to make an extra payment at the end of the year. And then I'm going to have some closing balance. Hopefully, at the end of 5 years, I'm going to have $100. Okay, so what's my opening balance? Well, I'm making the first payment straight away, right? So at the end of day 1 of this whole thing, I've got $17.24 in there. Over the first year, I earn 5% interest on that. So the interest is 5% of the opening balance this year. That's 86 cents, roughly. And at the end of the year, I am making the second payment. So that's, again, $17.24. So what have I got at the end of the first year? I've got the first payment I made, plus the interest, plus the payment I just made at the end of the year, $35.34. And the closing balance at the end of the first year is the opening balance at the end of the 2nd year, at the beginning of the 2nd year. Okay, 2nd year, same stuff happens, right? So I earn some interest. That interest is 5% of $35. That's $1.76. The payment's the same, right? Excel has told us these are the even payments we need to make. And so I've got a closing balance of 34. Now look at how many payments I've made so far. I made 1 at the beginning of the first year, 1 at the end of the first year, and one at the end of the second year. So there's 3 payments so far. Okay, remember, I want to make 5 payments. Okay, so let's copy this down. We're going to do the same thing in the third year, 4 payments, and in the fifth year. Sorry, and then the third year and fourth year. Now, in the fifth year, the opening balance in the fifth year is equal to the closing balance in the fourth year. The interest will build up during that year the same way, but there's no final payment at the end of the fifth year. Because remember, we were making payments at the beginning of the fifth year or end of fourth year at that date. So there's no payment here. What have we got at the end? $100. Okay, 2.5 cents, it's a rounding error. But it's basically right. Actually, if you have a look at that, and if I'd used the numbers to the right level of rounding, I would have got the right number here. So that works. Okay, so that's a very simple question you can ask. I need $100 in 5 years. How much do I need to put away each year? If my interest rate's 5%, I need to put away $17.24. Okay, the second example we're going to work with is, again, we're going to use one of these little tables, but the second example we're going to work with is a loan. So let's say I borrow $1,000 today. My interest rate is 6%. And I want to repay that, so the term of the loan, in, well, let's change it. Let's make it 10 years. So by the end of 10 years, I want to have repaid it down to 0. Again, we're going to use the payment function. So the payment function is solving the present value formula. Remember, the present value formula was a complicated monstrosity. So working out present value if you've got payment and interest is easy. Working out interest or payment if you've got present value is not so easy. So we're going to be using the Excel function again. Okay, so I want to know what payments do I make at a rate of 6% for 10 periods with a present value. Well, what did I start with? I started with $1,000. Future value, what do I want to end up with? I want to end up with 0. And we're going to make the first payment. Hey, we've just borrowed the money now. So we're going to make the first payment at the end of the period. It's usually the way it goes. Now, those periods might not be years. They might be fortnights or months. But usually the payment's made at the end of the period. Okay, so $135.87 are the payments that I'm going to have to make. Well, let's check that out. Let's do another one of these tables. Okay, opening balance, interest, payment, closing balance for each year. The opening balance is obviously the amount that I borrowed. The interest is the interest rate I've got times the opening balance this year. The payment is the amount we've calculated here. Okay, so what do we have in the first year? Closing balance at the end of the first year is the amount you started with plus the interest minus the payment. Let's just tidy this up by making it... Okay, closing balance at the end of the first year becomes the opening balance at the beginning of the second year. The interest is calculated the same. Okay, so that's what? 6% of that opening balance. The payment is going to be the same as before, right? We decided that up front. That's what the bank said. And the closing balance is just the opening balance plus the interest minus the payment. Okay, so let's just follow that through. It's basically the same thing in each year. Hey, look, we've ended up with 0. Okay, so it works. So this time value of money, once you understand it and you understand how you do the present value calculations, you can actually make a whole bunch of decisions with it. You can price loans. You can decide how much you need to save in order to give you a certain amount of money. You could compare savings plans. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things you can do. And I encourage you to work through the examples in the lecture slides.